Welcome, members. Children and Young People Scrutiny Board. Agenda. Substitutes nominated for this meeting. And apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Hutchinson, and Councillor Audrey Smith is acting as substitute. And we've also received apologies from Sheila Hurst.
Okay, well, welcome, Audrey. Members' interests. You know the rest. Pecuniary or otherwise, declare them either now or when it comes up. Admission of the public. We're on YouTube. Minutes of the meeting held 24th of June. Comments, members? There were none. Could I have a proposer and a seconder? Speak, somebody.
Present.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Howard and Sarah, thank you very much. Okay, item 5. Director. Children's Social Care Early Intervention Briefing. You going first?
Good evening, members. Yes, this is a general update on COVID, and I'm going to suggest the Assistant Directors and Ben Lehman, Consultant in Public Health, update you. I'm not sure what you'd like to start with first. Mark Randall can update you on the school position, particularly what's happening over the summer holidays and more importantly from September. Rob will update you on children's social care and early intervention, and Ben will cover the public health aspects as well of children's services. What would you like to start first with, Councillor Ray Strick?
Well, let's go in the order you suggested.
Okay, we'll start with Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you for an opportunity to join you again to talk about the current situation with regard to schools. Obviously, things are slightly more quiet as it's school holidays, and head teachers and school staff are enjoying a very well-deserved rest, albeit many of them will still be finalising plans for September, I'm sure. And I think, as I say, every time I do meet with Scrutiny members, it's important on behalf of the local authority as an officer that we recognise the hard work, the dedication of all of our head teachers over recent months. Obviously, as we've discussed before, DfE's guidance has been released, not necessarily in a timely manner, shall we say. The guidance was released and then schools were expected to make changes very quickly and needed time to consider that guidance. But all of our schools have moved forward and they are in a position to be able to open more widely from September. I hope that the briefing paper that Lauren shared on my behalf was useful in terms of giving an outline of where we are nationally and also in Calderdale in relation to wider opening. And I'll just go through that, not in great detail, but just identify and highlight some of the bullet points and then pause for any questions. So members will be aware that the government's intention and ambition is that all schools will open for all pupils from September. And I'm pleased to say that in Calderdale, our schools are moving towards that position. There are 2 factors that schools will consider. One of them is social distancing, and then the other one is keeping children in so-called bubbles. Members will be aware that bubbles have been in place since wider opening in June, albeit those bubbles are now going to be more large and significantly more children within a bubble. So basically, the idea of a bubble in a primary school would be, it could be the whole class. In a secondary school, it could be a class, a form, or even a year group. And those bubbles basically will stay together. They will mix together within their bubble, but they will not have any contact with any other bubbles. So basically, a class in a primary school will come in, will stay as they are, but will not be given any opportunity to mix either at playtime, at dinner time, at the start of the day, or at the end of the day with anybody else who isn't in their bubble. So the bubble methodology, along then with elements of social distancing and along with some of those other protective measures, which would include hand washing, the catch it, bin it, kill it methodology, and additional cleaning, the advice and guidance from DfE is that those control measures should be sufficient to reduce any transmission. So obviously there I've touched on staggered starts. Lots of schools already had staggered starts in place up until the end of the academic year, and that will continue, and also staggered end times as well. So basically that will alleviate any gatherings on playgrounds outside of school by parents or children. And again, schools were used to that. There's been some wonderful videos on schools' websites where head teachers have been showing the children around the school and, you know, saying if you're in year 3, you'll use that door, or year 4, you'll use that door. So again, head teachers have been really creative in terms of ensuring that message in relation not just to staggered starts and entry, but also in terms of what the school will look like. Because as we've discussed on previous occasions, schools did and will continue to look very different, and some of those children haven't been in school since March, so it's important that they are very clear about what they're coming back to. Lunchtime has been a tricky one for head teachers in particular, because obviously they up until this point they've only had, say, an hour at lunchtime. That might need to be extended. Lots of schools are looking at just providing a packed lunch, for example, for all children who would normally receive a meal, and delivering it to classroom doors, because again, it's about keeping those bubbles safe and secure and not allowing any opportunities for those children to mix. Within the briefing paper, and obviously within the DfE guidance, there's information in relation to what happens if there's a positive COVID case within a bubble, and you know there'll be contact tracing, and that bubble will be asked to self-isolate. And then there's also a little bit of information about an outbreak, if there is an outbreak. Now, if there are any questions around that, Ben Lehman, who's also in the meeting, will be able to give a little bit more detailed advice and guidance. Schools have worked really closely with us from an education inclusion point of view, but also with Ben from public health. And although we've had no outbreaks in any of our maintained schools or academies, we've had a number of occasions where Ben has been contacted all times during the day into the evening, just to give that advice and guidance in relation to bubbles where there's been a case or a suspected case. Just moving on then, obviously, we have to be aware and we have to be prepared for there to be changes in relation to any cases. And so the DfE have been very clear about the element of remote learning. Obviously, a number of our children, in fact, more than 75% of our children have been accessing remote learning since March. That will continue when it's needed. One of the things we're beginning to do from a school effectiveness team's perspective is really support schools with what we're calling a learning continuity approach, because it may be that some schools will need bubbles to isolate and not be in school where other children would be in school. So the DfE are continuing with the Oak Academy, which is online resources for every year group, for every subject, that then schools can blend with their own approaches if needed, if any children do need to be sent home to self-isolate. So I think that's a really strong plan there. And what we're also doing from an officer point of view is providing additional training for subject leaders to enable them to look very carefully at their curriculum mapping, really to ensure that there is no learning time lost if a bubble does need to self-isolate. Just moving on then to free school meals. For all children who are eligible for free school meals from reception to year 11, so even those children who have left year 11 have still received a £90 voucher for the summer holidays if they are eligible for free school meals. So that again is really positive that the government did continue that funding to enable schools to purchase those vouchers for those children who are eligible even up to year 11 or have just become eligible as well. And then really the final thing just to touch on is the catch-up funding. The government have identified £1 billion for catch-up funding. £650 million will be distributed directly to schools, and that would be at £80 per pupil. And then the additional £350 million has gone towards a national tutoring programme. So government have recognised that as a result of children being at home, then there has been lost learning. Even those children who have been accessing remote activities, have been accessing home learning packs, etc. Then there's a commitment by the government to ensure that all children catch up quickly, and the funding there will really support schools to do that. The National Tutoring Programme is in two parts. It will either be tutors, so schools will be able to go onto a portal on a website and access tutors that they can use the catch-up funding to fund, or it will be what they're calling a mentor programme as well. So some of our most disadvantaged schools nationally will be able to secure mentors who will basically be able to be employed by those schools, and schools will be able to use them as they need to use them very much. All of that is still very much in its infancy, and we don't have the level of detail as yet. The tutors should be up and running from November, and the academic mentors element from January. But it's very much an ambition of the government to ensure that those children do catch up as quickly as they can do. And then finally, just before I pause and ask for any questions, then we've begun to make plans to work further with head teachers in September. I've mentioned the element of learning continuity, and I've mentioned the element there of working with subject leaders. We do have in Calderdale, the Calderdale School Improvement Partnership, which Schools Forum have identified an amount of money. That's always the case, that's every year. And we've looked at some bids to enable the school effectiveness to access some of the funding to really provide some robust support to support schools in in meeting the needs of those children when they do return. However, the group of head teachers on the Calderdale Improvement Board felt that it was a little bit too early at the minute to make any final arrangements, because the initial feedback from heads has been that children have returned really quite happily. They've shown great resilience, and they've just wanted to get on with the basics of reading, writing and maths, which I think is a real recognition of how resilient children are. We do obviously feel that there will be things under the surface, whether it's safeguarding concerns, whether it's emotional well-being, mental health, that will come to the fore. But head teachers were very much saying to us, let's just wait and see what our challenges are when children are back at school, and when they're settled, we will then be able to look at using that funding to really shape the offer and the support to schools to most effectively meet their needs, and more importantly, meet the needs of the children once they're back and they are settled. So hopefully that has just given you a flavour of where we are. So I'm happy to ask any questions that any members may have.
Thanks, Mark. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. Just to make you aware that TLC Together for Looked After Children, the charity, has got quite a substantial amount of money to be able to spend to provide children looked after additional tuition. I think I've sent Julie an email in respect of potentially setting up a meeting to go through some of those things. I think it raises it's an ideal opportunity for us to work with Calderdale, put my other hat on, and I think it would be good to certainly spend some of the money that we've got.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blackburn. I've got that this afternoon. It's great. I'll talk to Rob and Mark about it tomorrow, and we'll come back to you. We had that meeting previously, didn't we? That was really, really helpful. Thank you.
I'll ask one while waiting for other members. This catch-up funding, the £1 billion, 650 of that is universal, will go to every school, is that right? The 350 million, okay, the 350 million National Tutoring Programme, additional targeted support. If you're calling it targeted support, presumably there's a target. What are we setting as a target group for this, and how will that be decided?
Yeah, I can't answer that, Councillor Ray Strick, because a lot of that is out of our hands. The tutoring programme, as I outlined, is set up in two parts. One of the things we don't have the detail about yet is how many tutors, for example, will be available to us in Calderdale, or how many of our schools in Calderdale will be able to access the academic mentors type of work as well. So we're still waiting for the granular detail about that. Some schools have already undertaken their own tutoring programs. I saw on Twitter, interestingly today, one of our primary schools celebrating some of its children being in over the summer in terms of tutoring. So again, the 650 million, the £80 per pupil will come straight to schools. Schools don't have to access the national tutoring programme if they prefer to either access their own tutoring or use it for any other strategy or any other methods that they feel will be beneficial as well. One of the heads last week in meetings said they were looking at actually using it to support attendance, because his feeling was that some of the most vulnerable children may have been some of their poorer attenders previously before lockdown. So his view was, if we can use it to support rewards for attendance, for example, actually if we can get them in the building, then that will make a huge difference. But the level of detail that we've not yet received in relation to the catch-up funding and the tutoring programme, other than the amounts of money that each school will receive.
Okay, all right, Sylvia.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for tuning in a bit late. It was a comment really about the tuition. It's very unfortunate, seems to me, that none of that, the extra tuition, is going to get going until October, November. So children are going to be back at school for a month, two, possibly more, before that really kicks in. That seems to be what it says, and that's assuming the government actually managed to get the programme and the tutors in place and ready and waiting.
It's right, Councillor Dacre. Our understanding from the government is that the tuition partners will be after October half term. So I think it's the 2nd of November, the first day back, and the mentor programme would be January. All that being said, I think for it to work very effectively, then children will need time to settle back into routines, to settle back into school, and teachers will need time to very much assess where those children are, what gaps in learning they do have. So in many ways, actually a 6-7 week period might not be such a bad thing. It will ensure that once the tutoring does come into play, then actually those tutors are very aware of those gaps in learning, that knowledge, skills and understanding. However, as I've just responded to Councillor Ray Strick, then schools don't have to choose the tutoring programme. They could choose to spend that funding on a range of other activities. What our schools are doing is they're very much looking at the guidance from the Education Endowment Foundation, who have done lots of work over many years on working with disadvantaged children and what strategies make most difference and are most effective and are best value for money. But it's a good point around the delay, but again, that's government led, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Bear with me. Audrey. Sorry, Audrey.
Hi, thank you. I just like clarification. 650 million is going to be divided out and every child is going to get the £80. And then the school has to use that money to buy into services that may or may not be used with the 350 million. Is that the case? And I've also got one other question about homeschooling. Is there any provision for children that are homeschooled to sort of, because they will have missed out in different ways?
Just in response to your first part, Councillor Smith, then that's absolutely right. The 1 billion has been 650 for schools and then 350 to set up and establish the tuition programme, but schools will still need to fund that tuition programme. Again, the actual amount escapes me, but I think the cost, or some of the detail we've had is that the cost of one session will cost more than actually schools are receiving anyway. Now, basically, schools will only receive £80 per pupil. A tuition session might be £20, £25. So that money isn't going to go far at all. So, again, a very valid point. Just moving on to electively home educated, we've been given no additional guidance in relation to funding for those children, because obviously if parents do choose to electively home educate, they make the choice to do that. They obviously can have and will have access to the Oak Academy national online learning resources, but once the parent decides to electively home educate their children, then the only responsibility the local authority have is to make sure there are no safeguarding concerns. So those children will just continue as they were pre-lockdown.
Happy, Audrey? Anne?
Yeah, well, we're all going on about the catch-up money, aren't we? Two things really. The national funding, the national programme, not the local £80 thing. As Sylvia said, that's not going to even, assuming they get the tutors, that's not going to be starting until early November. And the other programme won't start until January. But my information is that this is going to be a one-year catch-up. Do we have any idea whether that year runs from September, Mark, or whether that year will run from January when they finally get the thing going? Because if they're not going to get anything at all going until January, for example, which would be the second half of that catch-up national funding money, then they've only got a very short time in which to catch up if in fact the money is time limited to a year and it starts in September.
Absolutely, Councillor Collins. My understanding is that the year's programme actually doesn't necessarily relate as much to the timings or to the length of the tutoring, just the fact that schools will only receive the catch-up funding for 1 year whenever it hits the school budget. That again, yeah. the level of detail we still haven't got, and schools still haven't got. But you know, again, I think if you think about it from another perspective, then obviously, if some of the work doesn't start till November or even January, then for some of those children in key year groups, actually their external tests are in May, April, May. So it's not really going to make much of a difference to that group of children. But no, my understanding is very much that it's a year's programme, meaning schools will only get that funding once for next academic year.
And can I pursue that a little bit further then, Colin? If the national programme starts in, hopefully, if they get the tutors, would start in January. If the schools don't agree to access that, which would be subsidised at £15 an hour or whatever it is, they won't get the money anyway, will they? They actually have to buy into that national programme for the most disadvantaged children. They're not going to get the equivalent of another £15 to spend per hour on all their children that they decide need it, who are not going to be enrolling for the national programme.
Yeah, that's right. All schools will get is schools will get £80. Special schools and alternative provision will get £240. But your mainstream academies and LA Maintain just get the £80. So if they choose not to buy into the national programme that has cost £350 million, then they don't get any additional funding because they've chosen not to buy into that. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Helen.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're still all talking about the same issue. I think, first of all, we said, I think £8 is not going to go very far. You talked about £25 for private tuition. I think it could be and the rest, to be honest. It can be a good deal more than that. Certainly, I'm being contacted by people who are talking about private tutors for the summer. So parents who are sort of able and motivated to are getting tutors in place now. So again, we're going to get those who have more or getting more, and those who have not getting less. I think we already made the point that if it doesn't come in place till later this year or January, it's not going to make a great impact on those doing their exams in May. But then you've got those next year, and I think again to put the point that Councillor Collins made, is this just a year programme? Because those who, the effect probably is not going to begin and end in this next academic year, but may well carry on for some time to come. So it seems to me we really need to have a clear thought out strategy going into the future, always allowing we're in certain times.
Mark, no comment on that?
No, only to agree.
Stephen?
Thanks, Colin. Mark, am I correct in thinking that this money is definitely coming, so that the schools could actually start spending this from September, if that were using their reserves, which they'll more than likely have, knowing that it's going to be, the funding is going to come through in January? Is that a feasible scenario?
Yes, it is, Councillor Baines. We have been told that schools will receive the £80 per pupil. I'm not exactly sure when schools will receive that money, but government have agreed that they would receive that funding. So in many ways, schools can, and some have already begun to make plans, either using that money or then using additional money that they see fit if they've got it within the budget. But they will definitely receive that. I don't know exactly when it will hit schools' budgets, but yeah, it has been confirmed.
Thank you.
Howard?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask a question in relation to when the exams are published, the results of the exams are published, and what additional support is going to be made available to those young people. It's clearly a stressful time. It's even more stressful the fact that they've been awarded on mock exams, for instance. So it's just really trying to establish what the authority is putting in place to provide additional support, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Blackburn. One of the school effectiveness officers who links very much with the Calderdale Association of Secondary Heads has worked through some of the suggestions for Results Day, not just in terms of the support that can be managed, but actually how Results Day can be managed safely. Because obviously, there are a number of factors. Some of those Year 11 children have not been in school since March, as well as the fact, as you've quite rightly outlined, that they're getting results based on teacher assessment, on mocks. So that there's been a range of discussion around Calderdale with school effectiveness officers in terms of ensuring that day is as smooth a process as it can be in relation to social distancing, but also, possibly some upset, frustrated young people who may not have received the results. And also then an additional factor of the role of the teacher has also changed now. Historically, teachers, children get the results from exams. So actually teachers are just there in terms of, well, it's your performance on that day, either positively or negatively. Where I think there are some teachers who may be feeling slightly anxious as well, because they've had a far more involved role in some of the assessments and the gradings. And then the final thing just to say is, from a local authority point of view, we commissioned C&K Careers, who really support our young people, in terms of ensuring that they do remaining education, employment and training. So C&K Careers have also been working closely with schools and will continue to do so to offer that support. There is an option for children who don't receive the grade they want to actually resit later on in the year. So schools are very aware of all of that information and will be able to share that information on a more personal level with any of those young people who need it on the last week in August when results then are shared.
All right, Mark, I think we're done. I'd just like to make a comment that I see that attendance is going to be mandatory. Does that apply to teachers as well?
Yes, it should do, Councillor Ray Strick. Should do.
I understand. A member of SAGE, the government's advisory body on COVID-19, states that there has not been one recorded case of a teacher being infected by a child anywhere in the world ever. I believe those were his exact words.
Just to add to that, Councillor Ray Strick, and I think in many cases we have had some outbreaks in some of our independent special schools. And again, I think the challenge that we've needed to give to all of our schools, it's about staff behaviour. and it's about staff socially distancing from other staff in the staff room at the start, at the end of the day, because the transmission has been very much staff to staff rather than children, which again would align with the DfE guidance that if schools put into place the bubble methodology, the hand washing, the control measures and the social distancing, then hopefully the transmission rate should remain low. But yeah, we will see what happens when schools return in September.
All right, thanks very much. Who's next? Julie, is it Rob or Ben?
Rob, please.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening. What I wanted to do is, if it's okay with you, is go back maybe 17 weeks and just describe what I think we've recognised now as a number of different phases that we've had through this sort of pandemic. But I wanted to sort of try and talk you through some of the phases and in potentially what we've learned from that as well, because I think that's quite important. So if I go back to right at the very beginning on March 23rd, we went into lockdown fairly rapidly. We had to relocate all of our staff to home working, which was a fairly significant task for us to do. The next thing we had to do is we then needed to risk assess every single young person and child that was open to children's social care. So every child in need, every child with a child's protection plan, and every looked after child. And we did that within the space of about a week, where we assessed every young person, we RAG rated them, we identified cohorts that we were really concerned about, and we put in plans very, very quickly to make sure that them young people and children were seen as regularly as possible. One of the other things we did very quickly within this first few weeks is we started to link in with schools around children who should be in school, our vulnerable pupils who should be in school, and came up with some clear plans with schools about how we would manage vulnerable pupils in schools and how we would notify each other where we had concerns. So again, something fairly rapidly we had to put in place. What happened fairly quickly from there is that phase one probably in reality lasted about 2 to 3 weeks. It was the period where the legislation and the guidance was changed on a daily basis. The advice to social workers and visiting social workers was changing on a regular basis. And actually what we found at that time was we had a bit of a spike in terms of staff who were self-isolating, but that lasted for a very short period of time when they were very worried. But very quickly we got to the point where we settled down, and I would say probably within 2 to 3 weeks we'd settle down again. And actually from that point onwards, we've been trying to work our way back to business as usual, although we recognise it's a different usual, but we've been trying to work our way backwards to what we do really well. So the second phase is that we then reinstated visits to all of our families. Most of them visits were done on the doorstep, or they were virtual visits. We became very good at using technology. We became very good at developing innovative ways of speaking to children and families. And I think that worked really well for us. We developed a process very quickly in relation to keeping in touch with families, and we developed a monitoring system very quickly to reassure and to assure us that we were seeing all of the children that we needed to see. And that system we've kept in place all the way through the pandemic, and we still use it today in terms of how we measure that, the fact how we're successful in terms of visiting families. The third phase really is probably where we are in now, which is very much around, we've gone beyond visiting and knocking at the doors and doing visits on the doorstep. We've gone beyond virtual visits, where we are now for the vast majority of our families visiting the way that we used to do, but taking into account social distancing and protective equipment that we need to have. So most of our families now, we're back in a position we are visiting the way we would have done before lockdown. Some of them we are developing very, very different ways of doing that. But I think what we've developed very, very quickly is ways of doing things that I think we would want to continue to do following any further relaxation of the lockdown as well. What that meant for us in reality is we saw very quickly a fairly significant dip at the front door in terms of referrals and contacts. That lasted for probably 3 to 4 weeks, and then we started to get back to more normal numbers. And as we speak today, we are back to numbers that we would have had pre-COVID at the front door. So our work is still coming in, demand is still there. At the same time, we also saw at the very beginning, we saw a reduction in domestic abuse referrals that we were getting. that now on the last 4 to 5 weeks has gone back to up to pre-COVID numbers. So we're starting to see a return to our normal demand and normal pressures within the system. What we're also seeing is we've seen a whole range of different ways of working that have been developed across the service. So, for example, we very routinely now work with families where we do remote visits and we do remote check-ins with them. A lot of our families are feeding back that they feel really comfortable with that and that works for them. Some of our young people are saying that that's a model that they like much better. It feels a little bit less threatening for them and they feel much more relaxed doing that. So we've got a range of models that we've developed over the last 17 weeks that we, I think, are some really good examples of practice. What we've also seen over the last 17 weeks is we have seen staffing levels where they have been excellent all the way through, apart from the first couple of weeks. The vast majority of our staff continue to work from home and they do that very successfully. We have a small number of staff and that's mainly 2 teams. That's our front door team and our assessment team where they are routinely in the office because that's where we feel they can respond to referrals better. So they've been coming in on a rota basis and we've managed that really well. So they are now forming their own bubbles to make sure that we don't have everybody in at the same time. But them teams have continued to work from an office base all the way through and continue to work through from an office base as we speak as well. We started to see some real clear evidence in terms of stability. So what we've seen from day one is we saw a real consistency in our numbers of looked after children, and actually during the lockdown our numbers of looked after children have decreased slightly, which I'll come on to in the later report as well. What we've also seen is over the 17 weeks we saw a great deal of stability from our foster carers, and I've said this on a number of occasions, our foster carers have been exceptional through this period in terms of keeping children safe and keeping children within their foster families. So for the first 15 weeks, we didn't see any disruptions in foster care, which I think is quite remarkable. We also saw a similar pattern in residential care, where our children's homes managed to keep up and they managed to keep children safe, and we didn't have any disruptions in residential care either for that same period as well. We've continued to work very closely with our foster carers and schools around looks after children and children with a child protection plan around who should be in school and who shouldn't. And we've got a clear plan in place for all of them children around whether it's best for them to be in school during the lockdown or not. So that's been managed really well from Mark's team and from the social work teams as well. What we've seen more recently is we've seen some further evidence that we're getting back to a level of normality, although it is a different normal. So we've started to reintroduce contact for families where they've got children who have got looked after children. That's been planned on a really, really careful way with public health and with our colleagues in health and safety and in CAFM to make sure that the buildings compliant with COVID-19 regulations. We can undertake social distancing, and we've got all of that has been risk assessed. What we are finding though is actually for a lot of our young people in care, they are saying that they would prefer to continue with the contact arrangements we've had in place during lockdown, and many of them have felt more comfortable by having indirect contact with their family rather than direct contact. So we are working up plans for that to be one of our methods going forward as well. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen staff continue to meet families in their own homes and develop work plans and make sure that we're actually progressing plans. So that started to really move the things in the system as well. So we had a period where it felt like things were just stalling a little bit, but our staff have been amazing with that. They were adamant that they wanted to get back to normal, and actually they've been really creative about how to do that. So over the last 17 weeks, I think we've seen a number of phases that we've been through, and it feels now we're probably entering to stage four, I think, which is probably the next stage to whatever new normal is going to be. I think we're entering to that now where social workers, family support workers, family intervention workers are routinely visiting families now and doing some excellent work with them to try and help them move on from child protection plans, for help them secure stability in terms of looks after children. And I think that feels as that's a really positive position to be in at the moment. We've had constant updates, or we've kept in touch with all of our regional colleagues as well. And we know that we've learned from best practice from our regional colleagues, and they've learned from best practice from us as well. We have regular update with the Department of Education, and we've met with them and spoke to them on a regular basis around our current performance and our approach, and they've been very impressed with the way we've managed things there in terms of how our commitment to continue to visit families. So it feels like we are just getting used to the fact that actually we are working primarily from home now for the vast majority of our staff. We have made arrangements for some of our staff to come in and have some time in an office space where they can get support from various different managers, because that's what they need, particularly for newly qualified staff. And that's been quite important for us to recognise their needs are different to more experienced staff. So we've got that practice in place now. And I suppose what we're starting to do now is we're starting to prepare our children in need, children with a child protection plan and looks after children for September, when we anticipate that the vast majority of them will be going back to school. And for some of them, they will need quite a significant amount of support for them to be able to achieve that. Because one of the things that we do know is that for many of our children who we were worried about, we've seen a period of stability for some of them children that we hadn't seen previous to the lockdown. So we know we need to make sure that we, on top of that, and we're making sure that plans to return to school are done in a way that actually makes sure that we don't lose foster carers and lose parents, and we don't force children to disengage from us. So we know we need to do it on a really careful basis. But we're working really close with Mark's team about how we do that. And we're starting to go through individually for all of the young people that are currently open to us, and make sure that plans are in place for us to return back to school whenever it's the right time for them after September.
All right, thank you, Rob. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to, thank you for the comprehensive report, by the way, Rob. It's extremely useful information. My question relates to adoptions, and I've been made aware that there's been a delay in the process because of waiting for doctors to interview the particular people. You may be aware of this, and what can we do to expedite some of these to ensure that we don't lose the adoption process, and it's we get that through, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, what we've been doing, so One Adoption West Yorkshire have been doing similar to what we've been doing with fostering. So we've continued to recruit carers through this period. Some of that is really difficult because part of the requirement for the assessment process is that we need to visit families in their homes. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to progress assessments as far as we can, and the bit we've been leaving is the home visit to right towards the very end. So certainly in the last couple of weeks now, we're starting to see them starting to be reintroduced again. But if I'm honest, I think the delays in terms of adoptions are more in relation to the courts and judiciary. The delays in terms of cases being presented to courts have been fairly significant. And the courts have, for some adoptions, particularly because most of our hearings are done remotely now, where they've needed parents in the room, they've opted to delay the hearings, and sometimes they've delayed them for 6 months, which is quite a worry for children who are waiting to be adopted. We are starting to see that start to pick up slightly now, and we are starting to develop options where we can do video court hearings as well. But for some hearings, particularly where they are contested adoption hearings, the judges will only do them in person. And as of yet, we haven't had any of them in person yet, but we anticipate in the next few weeks, if things continue the way they are, that will start again. So in reality, the issues has not been around recruitment, it's been more around judiciary and making sure that we get people and certainly get the adoption plans approved in court. And obviously the other big issue we've had is in terms of being able to introduce a child to their new adoptive parents during lockdown. But again, we've developed some quite creative ways around doing that, around video conferencing and things like that. And we are now starting to do some formal face-to-face introductions for children where there are no identified risks in terms of COVID-19. But the way we need to do that is we've got to ask the adoptive carers to self-isolate for 14 days. the child has to self-isolate within their foster family for 14 days, just to make sure that we are doing everything we can to manage that risk. But that seems to be working relatively well. But whether that's sustainable, I think, is the issue, and whether we need to continue to try and put pressure on the judiciary to start to make different arrangements, particularly for adoptive cases.
All right, Howard. Okay, I have just a couple of questions. I'm surprised about the numbers coming back to normal. Got you, Stephen. Of referrals and domestic abuse referrals. As everything I'm seeing and reading from, for instance, the Local Government Association, is that social care should be preparing for a bulge in demand when the schools go back, as they are one of the major referrers. Do I take it that you don't think that's going to happen, or
no? I think we
the rest of the world.
Yeah, no, I think we are preparing for that. You know, all the evidence says that we anticipate a bulge. What we did see for a very short period when we started to get some of our young people going back into schools, particularly in year 10 and year 6, we did see a slight bulge, but it was something that actually was nothing out of the ordinary for this time of year, because we often see a bulge towards the end of the academic year anyway. So it wasn't out of the ordinary, but I think what we are doing is we've got systems in place to manage that bulge if it does happen in September, and we've identified staff who we can move around to make sure that we can manage that bulge as well as we can if it does happen. But I think I would agree. I think nationally, most of us are anticipating a bulge come September when pupils more significantly return to school.
That's really scary. So it seems to me you're saying two things there. Demand's back to normal, but we're going to get a bulge as well.
I think if we think of when we talk about normal, if we talk about the numbers that we had pre-COVID, they are almost consistent now with where we are at the moment. So they go up and down, but they do that every week, but they're almost back to where we were. That's only been in the last 6 weeks that's happened to that extent. I think what we anticipate when everybody starts to go back to school, because at the moment we've only had 2 school years going back to school, so the increase we had about 6 weeks ago, I think just reflected that. I think when we get to the point where more children going back to school, and particularly I think it will be where we've got children who are quite anxious about going to school, or where their behaviours are going to be disruptive in school, I would anticipate we're going to see more referrals when that happens.
But we've made plans for that.
We've made plans for that. So what we've done is we did this right from the very start. Actually, we have a number of staff that if the demand at the front door increases, we will be able to move them across into them posts, and they would support that for a short period of time if that's what happens. And then obviously if that bulge went on for a longer period of time, we would need to make further contingency plans.
Okay, Stephen.
Yes, Colin, thanks. Actually, I was just going to, I've actually done a 41 visit by Zoom to North and East, and I was going to suggest perhaps the panel, if they'd agree to it, a vote of thanks to all the social worker teams. But on thinking about it, we really ought to say anybody involved in the CYP services, because I think they're all doing a good job in difficult times.
Thank you. That would be really appreciated by all of our staff. Now, I have to say, bearing in mind I've been in Calderdale for 5 months now, so I came 4 weeks before the lockdown. I've been absolutely amazed by the commitment of staff and the way that they've adapted to things. I think it's been second to none. And when I speak to my colleagues across the region, I think we've got a very, very good response here. And I think it's down to our staff and our frontline managers as well about how they've responded.
Yeah, you've come to work in a very good place, Rob. Audrey.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Rob. I just wanted to ask about what sort of analysis is being done on, you said that a lot of the children that go back to school, they may have anxiety and rises, right, rather than looking at the sort of the effect, the result, what's being looked at to try and stop them getting anxious and getting into that situation, right, prior to be putting in sort of social care.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
That's fine. So where we've got children who are looked after, that planning really has been happening from day one, really. So we've been working very closely with the head of the virtual school and the social work teams and the foster carers, particularly in terms of preparing young people for the fact that they will be going back to school at some point. I suppose when we started, we possibly anticipated that some pupils would be out of school for just a number of weeks. So we started that planning right from the very beginning. As the lockdown has gone on further, what we have got is we've got plans in place for some of our children to get some additional support from the head of the virtual school during the school holidays, what would be the school holidays. What we've also had is some really good, excellent relationships with schools, where schools have been offering to meet with individual children and young people to try and provide reassurance and to provide support there as well. Where we've got children with a child protection plan, I suppose we've been trying to think about how we can replicate that for that cohort as well, because they tend to be a group who are, from a head of the virtual school perspective, it's not naturally been recognised that that group would benefit from that. But more and more recently, we've been trying to take the same approach there, where the head of the virtual school have started to get involved in some of them cases at an earlier stage to try and help us manage some of the anxieties. And in some ways, it's managing the anxieties of the carers as well. So what we've been doing with our therapeutic team is that they've been providing support to foster carers as well around some of this as well. All of that is done on an individual basis, and we know our young people really well. So individual social workers have been working really closely with schools around how is this going to happen. There will be some realities that some of our children will go back at a slightly later date because that's what's best for them and that's how it's been planned. But also there will be, for some of our young people, we would want to get them back into school at the earliest opportunity as well, and schools are working with us around that as well. So I think we've been working on it probably for the last 17 weeks. We knew schools would come back at some point. We've been trying to make sure that we've been planning really well for that. But we've upped our support to foster carers. We've provided more therapeutic support and more one-to-one support from our therapeutic team. And certainly for some of our young people where we know they've been anxious about school before, we've been upping the therapeutic support to them as well during this period as well. And obviously for most of our children who've been at home, they've been getting work delivered from the schools as well. So they've been keeping up to date with schoolwork and keeping in touch with, hopefully, with their peer groups as well.
All right, thanks. Before anybody else, I have one more question. I was interested about what you said about remote visits, the new normal. Are we sure that they're as effective as actual visits? And I'm finished. Are we confident that we're not missing anything? Is there some sort of risk assessment being done? We say that, or you say that the young people like them. Well, there's lots of people young people like. I like going down pub and playing dominoes when I was 15, but I'm not sure my parents were that keen. It's not a question of what they like or what we like. It's a question of whether they're safe and whether they're effective. And do we think that remote working is safe enough that you get a good enough picture to carry on? We're talking about you won't allow people to be adoptive parents until you've been to their home. So there's all that question to me about remote visits and safety. You read the truly horrific cases in the last 10 years or so, and even home visits weren't that effective because people were being fooled, and it's much easier to be fooled, I would imagine, remotely.
Can I give you, it's quite a long answer, Councillor Ray Strick, but I think it's important to...
I would expect there's nothing else, Rob.
There's two bits there really from what you said. Just to reassure you, our statutory visits, we continue to do statutory visits and they're face-to-face visits. So they're just done routinely now, and we monitor that every week. So for example, I could tell you that out of all of our children with a child protection plan, there's one child that hasn't been visited in the last 2 weeks, and I know the reason why, and we understand that. So we've got that assurance mechanism really well in place. But I suppose the model we've developed over a number of years is called systemic practice, and it's built on relationships with families. So we would only do this where we know we've got good relationships with families, and we know we've got them relationships where we can build on. So the virtual visits come on top of our statutory visits. So they're not instead of, they're on top of. But what we are finding is that for a lot of our staff, it feels less difficult. For some of our families, they're getting visited by so many professionals all of the time, and actually to be able to do something different does give some of our families a bit of space to be able to be families as well. So I think it's all based on relationships, it's all based on the relationships we have with families, and actually it's all risk assessed as well. So if there was a concern, if there was a family that we were really vulnerable about, we would be continuing to do extra visits, and there would be face-to-face visits as well.
I take all that into consider. I take all that in board. No point talking about systemic practice of this board. We were the people that brought it in. Hear what you're saying, and you say it's been risk assessed. I want to believe that. I really do. I'm not convinced that remote visits are as accurate as. Anyway, there's no doubt it's a subject we'll come back to later on in time.
Can I come in, please, Councillor Ray Strick? I met with all of Rob's team last week on a Zoom call, all of the managers in social care. It was like this, but there was 30 of them. And we know that relationships are at the heart of every bit of what social workers are about. We're talking about how they can safely go into the house and see children. They are spending time taking children out of the house in the fresh air. Clearly, that's just not sustainable either, is it, in, come winter. So I took some advice from Deb Harkins from Public Health and from Ben about visors, not face masks, but, the clear ones where you can see people's expression, because I think it's really important when you're going into a family house, particularly when you're seeing children face to face. And we want that to continue, because you're right, doing anything like this, it's not the same as being with you in the room, is it? No matter what you say, you don't pick up on the nuances, you can't interact in a normal conversational way. You don't see the, there's so many things that you miss out on. So Rob is procuring through PPE channels, proper visors, which can be disinfected every night, so that there isn't any issue. Debs has said, yes, we've got to maintain 2 meters where we can. The government guidance is 1 meter plus. The plus is a protective factor, and the protective factor is the visor. So we are buying visors, clear ones. I think children are pretty used now to seeing people in masks and visors. We're all required to wear them, as we know, when we go shopping. So we're just trying to normalise that to make sure we can get back in the house and have those face-to-face visits at every visit. I know what you're saying. We are doing some youth work sessions remotely, but it's not the same as being with people. But whatever we're in the situation of, kind of safely protecting the staff, but also doing the work, we know we can't do the change work with families without being in there and actually spending proper time with them in a safe way. So we are buying visors for everybody. Every social worker will have them. It'd be good, Councillor Baines, if next time you talk to North and East, or you do one of your Reg 41s, whether you check out with the social workers how that's going. But I agree with you. It's got to be face to face. Yeah, it's great we can use new technology, but you've got relationships, and when you've got a long-standing relationship, this kind of thing can work. But when you're trying to do change work, you're trying to make sure kids know what's going on for them, you've got to see them face to face. So I'm with you, and to assure you that we are getting PPE where our staff can go in and do exactly that on every visit if they need to.
Thanks for that, Julie. I guess it's your turn, Ben.
Thank you. I'm not going to take too much of your time up, because I know you've got other things on the agenda, and my colleagues Mark and Rob have covered a lot in detail of the support that we've given. I think our role is twofold, really. There's something about public health services, which I'll talk about in a bit, but our other key function throughout this has been to provide that support to Rob and his sector, and to Mark and his sector, so that they can operate as normally as they can, with adequate safeguards in place to protect the health of children, young people, and the staff that are working with them. So that's ongoing, and it's not just the education sector and social care, but it's early years sector as well. It's wraparound care, and it's holiday clubs. So it's a full range really across Calderdale in terms of the support we're giving them in terms of how to operate as safely as they can and protect the health of their staff and young people. specifically in terms of our public health nurses, our health visitors and school nurses. Clearly it's been challenging for school nurses in that the role that they would normally do, in terms of more of an externally facing role within schools, has been compromised a bit by what's been going on. What they have done instead is established a new, I suppose it's a new way of contact through using remote means that both children, young people, and their parents can contact them on, called Chat Health. That's been really effective in terms of being able to provide that any questions that children and young people and their parents have about COVID-19, more generally about the return to school as well, and it's part of that support mechanism in place for them. That what we've also done with some of the school nurses is we've trained them up to be able to keep providing immunisations. So traditionally they're undertaken by GPs. We're very conscious that if we don't keep up to date with the childhood immunisations, that may cause us major problems over the winter if we're dealing with COVID and we're also dealing with outbreaks of measles, for example. So that's really important, and I think again we've done really well in Calderdale in that respect. A lot of other areas are now working out how they're doing the catch-up programmes. We've managed to maintain those childhood IMS throughout that period. The health visitors, we've been guided a bit by national guidance as to what we do, and it's not dissimilar to what Rob described earlier, really, in terms of the stages the social care have been through. We have guidance through from NHS England which says what we can and can't do. I think as both myself and the service would like to be able to do more than we've been able to actually. The service were very much up for doing many more visits than they've been allowed to do by the National Health Service or by NHS England, really. We have maintained contact antenatally, so whilst people are pregnant, so that they know who their health visitor is, and we've maintained the new birth contact, so that as soon as you've had your child, you get a visit from a health visitor just to talk through how things are going and the development, early development of the child. We've continued to provide visits to those who we've got concerns about in terms of child development in its broadest sense, and those who are linked in with Rob's team in terms of on the children's social care list have also continued to receive support where it's required, and they've also used their clinical judgment. If they don't know the family, they've engaged with them more, and if they've got concerns about the family, they've engaged with them more. So we've done the most we can. We've probably pushed the boundaries a bit in terms of what we're allowed to do, to be honest, but we've done it for the right reasons to ensure that the support is really targeted at those children who we've got concerns about, to ensure that we've got eyes on the children really as best we can. I think I don't really want to go any more detail. I think it's a lot of the same things that you've heard from Mark in terms of, and Rob, in terms of doing the best we can within quite difficult circumstances for everybody across the sector. We work very closely with our colleagues in children's services to ensure that we do have eyes on children that we've got concerned about, whether that's through children's social care or whether that's through health visitors. And I think actually that it's worked really well in the circumstances we've had. So happy to take any questions really.
Members, any questions for Ben? That's going to be a no, Ben, but it's always lovely to see you.
And you, Chair.
It's me plumber on the phone. Nathan, I'll have to ring you back in the middle of a meeting. All right, cheers. Bye. Sorry about that. I'm having a new gas boiler fitted. You'll have a mask on, I think. Members, now with item 6, I think. Children looked after annual report. This came to corporate parenting a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure all members have read it. How is Claire? Do we know?
We do know, yes. She's been in hospital now for nearly 4 weeks, and she's still in hospital this week. We're hoping that she'll be.
Hang on a sec. Can I just
sorry,
remind
yeah, sorry.
this is live streaming, and I know you'll all be very concerned about Claire. Just to let you know, yeah, she's still recovering. I think we'll just leave it at that for now. We can drop you a note privately. Is that okay, Chair?
I'm very sorry, Julie. Yes.
No, it's fine. It's so easily done. It's fine. We'll drop you a note. In fact, I'll do it now. So you all know. I'll send it to Alex and he can send it on. But thank you for asking about her.
Okay. So I guess this is you. Is it Bob? Rob?
It is. Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Off you go.
Would you like me to pick up the key points, go through the report, pick up the key points, then do questions at the end?
Well, I think have members read the report? Of course we had. Do we have any questions to start off with? I have one or two.
Okay.
But if anybody else will go first. Well, I'll start off, Rob. We raised it at corporate parenting. I'm sure you know what I'm going to ask about external placements. I've lost the email now. And the Allafield situation. If you just clarify that for the rest of the members of the scrutiny board, and then I'll ask my questions afterwards.
Yeah, so if I give you a rough timescale, this is from the top of my head because I haven't got it written down. So the proposals around Allafield review were agreed at Cabinet last July. Straight after the Cabinet had approved that, there was a more detailed spec that was drawn up and the tender document that was established. That went out to tender just after Christmas. It was due to go out just before Christmas, but we knew providers wouldn't be around, so that went out just after Christmas. And the tender was awarded in late February after it had all the legal advice and things like that. The refurbishment was due to begin towards the back end of March. And actually, obviously, people know that then we went into lockdown. All the building work was paused at that point, but also we made a service decision that we needed to keep Allafield View as a bit of a satellite for our children's homes in case any of the children's homes or any of the children in the home got infected and we needed somewhere safe for them to go. So we've been using Allafield View during lockdown to, we've had one young person in there, but we've also been using it to develop our outreach work for children on the edge of care to try and prevent children coming into care during lockdown as well. So we're now in a position as the lockdown has started to relax, where we are now progressing the building work again. The building work is due to start on Monday, the 3rd of August. And we're waiting for the first couple of weeks, then we should get a detailed breakdown of how long that building work will take to be completed. The other things we've been doing while we've been waiting for the building work to start is we've now got a senior homes manager in place. So Guy Greenwood has been appointed as the senior homes manager. And if you remember from the Cabinet report, that's the person who will start to coordinate all of the residential homes and have oversight of that, which gives us some capacity there. We've also been developing our model in terms of sleep on it in the community and making sure that we've been developing that through this period. And certainly one of the big factors in terms of our current stability in terms of looked after children is the fact that we've been doing some really intensive work with young people on the edge of care through Allafield View and through staff who have been connected to Allafield View or sleeping it previously. So that continues. So we've also now in a position where we've appointed a homes manager for Allafield View, and that person just needs to go through the final stage, which is an interview with Ofsted for them to measure the suitability to be a homes manager. And we anticipate that that's going to be done within the next 2 weeks as well.
All right. I just want to follow up on that. So looked after report last year for external placements, the number was 22 external residential placements. And on that basis of that 22, the Cabinet approved a new residential home Allafield, which we should never close in the first place. But anyway, and yet this figure the figure this year is 29, so we've gone up 7 on external placements. The reason we want to bring external placements down is we all know they're very expensive. So is the reason that it's gone up from 22 to 29 in a year because we haven't opened Allerfield? Or is the strategy of not using external placements not working?
I think what I would say is, and again, I suppose I can only talk from 5 months of being here, you know, when we do any work around children coming into care, we absolutely make sure that it's the right children that come into care. You know, we're really confident around that. Where children need residential care, I think we're really confident that residential care is the right option for them. And actually, it's only as a last resort that external residential placements are considered, and it is a very last resort. We try everything else before that. I think what I would say is that the national picture in relation to placement stability and placement sufficiency for children is, I would probably say, well, I think Lord Justice Mumby described it as it's a crisis, a care crisis. The numbers of children coming to care nationally are significantly higher. So we're seeing a different picture in terms of our profile of children in care as well. So we are seeing more teenagers, we're seeing more issues that are actually not to do with families, but to do with issues outside the families. So I think it's a really difficult one to answer fully. I think we are absolutely confident where external placements are being used, it's for very specific reasons. And I could give you, I would give you an example, but I can give examples of why we've used it in the last couple of months, but I wouldn't want to do that in this meeting, but we could send you through details of that and you would understand in terms of the complexity of some of these children, why we needed to use external placements as an option at that point.
I think we generally understand why we use external placements, and I think this panel was very supportive of the Allerfield decision. We want more Calderdale children looked after in Calderdale. That would be our point. The 22 to 29 is a worrying trend. I'll leave it there. Anne.
Chair, can I come in just on a few quick points just on that, please?
Sure.
I've just been quickly trying to find the report that Claire does on the external placements, just to double check the numbers. I can't find it at the minute, but from my memory of the last report she did, I think there are 26 children in external placements. 2 of those are in remand. They've been remanded by the courts into our care, so we don't have any control over that. We do get a small budget from the Youth Justice Board to pay for them. So we've got 24, and we had to make the decision, as Rob said, during lockdown, you know, do we crack on with the building work and leave us with absolutely no capacity at all in case any of our children got COVID or any return to the borough? So we made that decision. As soon as we knew we were in a stable position, we've lifted that and we're on with the building work. We're also in discussion with CAFM and have been for some time around other buildings around the borough. We do want some provision down in the up in the Upper Valley, somewhere in Halifax and somewhere in the Lower Valley too. And Dan McDermott is working with that working with us on that now to identify other buildings too, and we know it is a priority to bring children back to the borough. So I just wanted to assure you the numbers may have been high in that report at the end of the year, but they actually have come down slightly. I think they're around 24, but I will confirm that for you.
All right, thanks. Anne.
Okay. I suppose we're still pursuing this external thing, the external placements for residential and external fostering placements. And I know Colin and I asked that this should come to scrutiny because there were things at the corporate parenting panel that we didn't feel we got answers to. And maybe you can't do it tonight, but the 2 things I would like to have would be, out of those, well, we thought there were 29. If there are 26, that's even better. What we'd really like, I think, would be to have those external placements and those 42 external fostering placements broken down, because I accept that there will be children who have to be outside because of all sorts of different reasons. And certainly there are children who are fostered externally, particularly in terms of when you've got a member of the family who's fostering them and they're outside the borough. So it would be really helpful and reassuring if the figures for external residentials and external fostering placements could actually be broken down for us, so we can see just how many of those children it would be feasible to try and support internally rather than them going outside the borough. And then we've got an idea of what it is we're needing to look for alternative premises for. Because I've noticed on the planning committee, there are several different, the ones that now you can get around the government loophole, several different applications for changing houses into small residential private homes for children. And if they can do it, why can't we?
Okay, thanks,
It's not a
Councillor.
question, it's just something to ask you to try and do for us.
Yeah, we can get the figures for you. We'll get them broken down in a bit more detail because it's a good point that you're raising. I have met with our planning colleagues a couple of times around that change of use. And yes, we could make use of it ourselves, but also about making sure that we are using all the planning regulations as well to make sure things aren't popping up everywhere if we don't want them popping up everywhere, if you know what I mean.
Talking to planning, Julie. My Lord, your power gets everywhere. Sarah.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. I've just got a quick question about the SDQ completion rates. Now, the SDQ I see from the very handy glossary of terms, thank you very much for putting that in, that's very useful, is the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. It is, though, it's really useful to have a glossary. So I understand that it's about it's sort of like a part of the well-being, you know, a survey of well-being. So the completion rates, I just wanted to confirm that the completion rates are the number of children that have the percentage of young people that have completed the questionnaires. And then the SDQ average score is how, so is it, if it's high, does that mean that if you score high, does that mean that you're not so, that people are less happy or finding more difficulties? Just wanted a bit of clarification on what the scores actually mean, if that's okay. And then, yeah, so that first, please.
Yeah, so the STQs have been around for quite a number of years now, actually. They're still are not very warmly received by the service, actually, in terms of nationally, because actually they're quite a crude measure, if I'm honest. They are used in other sectors, but they're used alongside other measures to give you a really good picture. So the way that the STQs are described should be done is that they should be done, and they should be done by usually 3 different people. So it would be the main carer, the school, and the young person if they're old enough. So they should each score themselves. But the only score that counts is the foster carers. The carers score is the only one that counts. Now, what we do know is that for some foster carers, and I think some of the foster carers actually said this at the corporate parenting board, if they're having a bad day or if they're having a difficult time or if they feel things are not going well, they sometimes score higher, because the higher score means that actually you're more likely to get additional support. But also what we do know is sometimes actually, and this is something that we're trying to unpick, is that because we have a very good therapeutic service attached to our foster carers, is there almost a different incentive to score higher, because you know that you will get support from the therapeutic service as well. So what we're trying to do without that is we've still got an issue around the foster carers not routinely doing them, and not all of them are routinely doing them. So we've got a big push on at the moment for that to be much more robust. So the IROs are checking on that in looked after children reviews, and the supervising social workers are checking on that when they go to visit foster carers. So we anticipate that the numbers will go up. But actually, if the numbers go up, the average scores will then change quite significantly as well. Just to answer the issue, the numbers about the scores, the highest score implies that there is a young person with emotional health difficulty, so it's emotional health. And if they get a high score, then they get an additional service from the therapeutic team. So again, anybody who comes back with an adverse score will get a service from the therapeutic team. So that's the way it works currently. One of the other models we want to do is to try and triangulate the 3 different approaches, so the schools, the foster carers, and the young person score, to see whether that would bring the average score down and whether that would be a better measure for us to use.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I think that's great, actually, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Sylvia. Sylvia? Hello?
Right, yes, thank you. Just on the loss of foster carers through the year, when it says 5 were terminated by service, is that because they're unsatisfactory or doing something wrong? And is that a normal sort of number, or has it gone up or down? And is it when they've actually got children with them that's been happening?
There are a number of reasons for terminated by service. Unfortunately, the codes that we can use are quite limited, so we only have a set number of codes to use. In terms of where there would be terminated by service, would usually be where there would be, if there was been an allegation against a foster care and that was proven. That's not what this is describing here. This is describing something slightly different. So although they're terminated by the service, it possibly is around the fact that they are providing support that we don't need anymore. So for example, it could be that they were providing short break care, and that's not something we need at the moment. But I can go away and check that one in terms of then come back and report on that, because I don't know that detail of this report, but I can come back and report back on that. I do know that we've seen a reduction in the numbers of foster carers who've left over the years. We saw a bit of a dip last year, and we've seen a dip this year in terms of numbers of foster carers leaving. The biggest reason foster carers leave is their own family circumstances. Often it's because they become a carer of an older parent, or their own circumstances change. It might be their own child coming back from university and things like that. So there's a whole range of reasons for that. But again, equally the same, as Councillor Collins, we could break that down in more detail to give you an oversight of that.
Please. Audrey, Councillor Smith asked, are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children included in the external residential numbers?
No, there's no unaccompanied asylum seekers in the external residential numbers. So at the moment, we've got 4 unaccompanied asylum seeking children, which is a very small number for us. I think it's probably the smallest we've had for quite a long time now. But there are no under 18s in external residential placements who are unaccompanied asylum seekers.
Lovely. Amanda. I don't see it. Oh, there we go.
Unmute. Yay. Thanks,
there you
Chair.
go.
Thank you. So if I could just refer back onto page 7 of the report. I'll just get it back up again on my screen. I was wondering about the adoption figures and whether 20 was really a good number, or is there any more we can do with that? Yeah, thank you.
So 20 is slightly lower than the number that we anticipate, and we projected around 24, so it is slightly lower, but I think it does say in the narrative there the reason why we didn't achieve that 24, and that's actually to do with a couple of cases where they were delayed in the courts and we didn't meet the timescale for that year. And also again, in terms of, there was one where we put it on hold because we needed to do some more therapeutic work. In terms of whether it's a good number or not, I think it's a really difficult one. I think it's a number that I think is a reasonable number, but there are a whole range of factors around adoption that actually we need to consider in terms of when we think about numbers and whether it's good. Because also what we are seeing is we're seeing an increase in relation to special guardianship orders as well. So although we've got a slightly lower number of adoptions, we've got an increasing number, and that's increasing quite well in terms of special guardianship orders. So that's where there's an extended family member who would come forward to care for that child on a long-term basis. And obviously we would want to support that wherever we could as well. So the two figures together almost need to be looked at in conjunction to see how we're doing there. So I think it's a good figure in terms of where we are at the moment. And it is a figure that can fluctuate quite significantly depending on the needs of the children who need to be placed for adoption.
Thank you.
One adoption are coming to Scrutiny next month, so August 26th, so we can ask some of those questions then. You made an interesting point about special guardianship orders, Rob, and the increase in the council traditionally likes special guardianship orders because they're cheaper than fostering, and I believe that the paper that went to cabinet is trying to correct that. So increasing those numbers is really to be expected. I'd like to just touch, if I can, nobody else is waiting, I don't think. On the fostering section again, we're talking about a fostering review and recruitment of the recruitment of a recruitment specialist, if you like. What are the parameters of this review? What were we reviewing? I read an interesting report that was sent to me by Mike, who's here at the moment, that independent fostering agents, 10 companies own 70% of independent fostering agents. Was that the right number? Is what I'm thinking of? Is that what it might? Yeah, half of all private and voluntary fostering placements are offered by just 6 companies. When we've done quite a few reviews of fostering. It's a bit of a favourite of this committee. Are we sure that going down the road of our own voluntary, have we considered all other options? Have we considered I can't believe I'm going to say this, a regional fostering association, like we were talking about One Adoption West Yorkshire? It's obvious that this marketplace, and it is a marketplace, what a horrible phrase to use for fostering children, is dominated by big organisations that they're hoovering up the fostering applications, and it comes down to competition in the end. You know, are they paying more than we are? They probably are. Do they give better training? They probably don't. What's our USP to recruit fostering parents when there's these massive companies around that are going to gobble them all up anyway? Are we actually batting our heads against a brick wall like we have been for the last however long it seems to have been? Or is there actually a way through it? Or do we just need to completely scrap what we're thinking now and do it a different way?
So if I give you my personal perspective, so this is having been responsible for fostering in 3 local authorities now. Yeah, I absolutely do believe there's a way, and I think actually if you ask foster carers, they actually much prefer to be supported by local authorities in terms of the support that they get is better, the more personal touch that they like. But I think there is a real challenge now, because I think actually you've hit the nail on the head. It has become a marketplace now, foster care. The independent sector is a really difficult nut to crack actually in terms of trying to fight against that. But I genuinely feel if we get the offer to foster carers right, then people will stay with us and people will eventually leave the independent sector and come to local authorities if we get the offer right. The other thing just to put in there is the cost of independent fostering placements is almost double what we would be paying for our own carers as well. So when you think of the profit that is made for by the independent sector, it is significant. And I think we should be aiming for our children to be cared for by Calderdale foster carers, because I think they are, if we get the right carers and we support them well, they provide the best option, I think.
Right. There's a lot of issues in there. I absolutely agree that I'd like our young people to be looked after by our fostering people. I don't think I've ever deviated from that. But your first sentence there really scared me a little bit. You said that foster carers prefer to work for local councils because they feel they get better support. I'd love that to be true, but 18,000 foster parents, 18,000 children in foster care with IFAs. So they're employing literally thousands of people. Over half of them are these big organisations that obviously they don't want to go to work for councils. They don't want to go to work for councils because the councils are not offering the right thing. I agree with you, we should be selling, come and work for Calderdale, we'll look after you, we'll support you. But we've done all this and we're still not recruiting enough foster parents. like I say, are we sure that we haven't looked outside the box enough here? Is that not a head in the sand statement that foster parents, you talk to foster parents and they want to work for local authorities? Well, you're talking to the ones that do work for local authorities. So, you know, that's probably the case. It's a real problem. I understand the problem. I'm not sure that we know what the solution is. That we've recruited a recruitment manager. Is that going to work? Is it going to work? I don't know. If they're paying if it's so much more, see again, we're back to economics, aren't we? In the free market, I hate the word, but if we're paying £400 a week to our foster parents and a private agency costs us 700. I've made this argument before. Why aren't we paying our foster carers 600? We're still saving £100.
Can I come in here, because we have done price comparisons about what we pay our carers and what they pay in the private sector. And you probably remember a report that went to Cabinet a couple of years ago, you know, making sure that we were lifting up the fees and the numbers depending on how many children you look after and making sure we really are competitive. I think you raised an interesting point, Councillor Ray Strick, about regional approaches, because I know you have been very much against those in the past. But actually, when you look at, it'd be interesting to see what you think after you see the One Adoption West report next month, because I've chaired the management board last week. They've recruited more adopters. They've increased the panels at the moment from 7 to 9 to try and make sure that we're approving as many adopters as we can. And adopters are coming forward during COVID. And I think some authorities have seen foster carers come forward. I'm not sure whether we've seen exactly the same amount, but I think you raise a valid point about the recruitment officer. Is it wise for us to spend money on our own recruitment officer where maybe we could do things on a bigger footstep? The One Adoption West website is really well used and really functional. People hit on it all the time, get lots of information. Our website is good too for fostering, but we've really got to, put that call out, particularly during COVID, that our children need local foster carers. We don't want to send them out of borough any time, but definitely not during the pandemic. And really put the call out from, you as ward members as well, where people you talk to in the community. Our children need foster carers. But I think you're raising a valid point that Rob and I can reflect on about actually, are we throwing good money, not good money after bad, but are we wasting our money? Should we look at doing something on a wider footprint? We have had discussions when we set up the regional agency for adoption about whether we go broader. And we have looked, as you'll know from the Cabinet reports, at our special guardianship support and our adoption support across West Yorkshire to make sure it's the same. We've got the White Rose framework, and I know again that's not something you want to hear mentioned, but the White Rose framework does give us some ability to look at block contracts and cutting down on some of the spot purchasing and the crazy prices we're being asked for. So we already collaborate across the 15, but given the good partnership working and the arrangements we're able to put into place across West Yorkshire, I do think you raise a valid question that Rob and I can reflect on, particularly with Claire when she's back in work.
I was very impressed with the One Adoption West Yorkshire last year when they came, or 6 months ago when they came. I think I made my feelings clear at the time.
You did, yeah.
And you're right, I'm against White Rose framework, not for ideological reasons. I don't think it works. I don't think you get the best deal. But anyway, but there is things to be said. Audrey, would you like to ask your question instead of writing it down?
Yeah, can do. Just wondered, is there no possibility to front fund so that we front fund prevention work as opposed to fostering? If fostering's so costly, we know that austerity's got a factor in the number of looked after children. Is there no way we can use some money to prevent people going into foster care?
We are actually, with Allerfield being developed as a new children's home, we are putting additional money in there for the team that were working in Sleep on It, the assertive outreach, to continue to work in the community really intensively with families. And you're absolutely right. If we could pump more money into early intervention and prevention, we know it works, and we know the more we can do at that end, the more it will stop children coming into care. I think the relationship with schools that's been described this evening for you from Rob and Mark gives us a real opportunity, particularly with a hiatus in examinations coming up and tests this year, to really concentrate on nurturing and inclusion, trying to reduce exclusions. All children will be returning, will need that nurturing approach, that we've talked about tonight. So I do think there's an opportunity to do things differently in the coming term, particularly with schools not having to focus on getting children ready for those tests and examinations. And I agree with you, Councillor Smith. If we had lots of investment, definitely, you'd have so much more support there early on, but there is a lot there on the ground. The health visiting, the school nurses, all the things that we've got in the voluntary sector, what nurseries do, the 2-year-old offer. There are lots of things there, that support families, to try and stop children coming into care. And we do have those really targeted services as well, where we need to, the kind of sleep on it approach to stop children going out of the borough. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Agreeing with two of us, Julie, don't get into a habit of that. Councillor Parsons-Holt.
Hi. Unfortunately, I couldn't actually attend the One Adoption meeting last year because I had conflict of interest. I was in the assessment process. So I'm coming from this from a place of experience. And from my experience, it's got to be one of the most awful experiences I think I've ever had. What we thought was going to be a very supportive experience was actually quite a punitive one. And it was shocking, actually. So when I looked at the figures, I wasn't able to comment on it at the time. Over 800 people were in the process, and they went through stage 1 and went through the training, and then discovered there was only 100 people, roundabout, it's about 97 to 100 people actually adopted that year. That is pretty interesting, isn't it? What happens in that with the 700, well, it's just ballpark, it's 700 prospective adopters that are sat there thinking, well, yeah, actually, this is not a very easy experience. I don't expect it to be. I work with very challenging young people. I work with safeguarding. I also work therapeutically with kids with attachment disorders. So I wasn't coming at it from a place of not understanding what was going on, but I was just shocked, really shocked at I guess being on sort of prospective adopters Facebook pages and everybody supporting each other, which is great. And then when you actually witness what people experience through the assessment process, I actually think that's probably something that we really need to look at through scrutiny. And whether we do that on a local level or maybe it needs to be on a national level, I don't know, but I understand that this is a bigger picture than just our local authority. And I'd be really interested to know where those 700 other people went. I've heard people say that they've basically not gone ahead because they've been told the height of the steps is wrong. I've heard comments mentioned about, oh, your interior, it's not the right, it's not good. I've heard comments, somebody actually had a conversation with me one time on Facebook they'd been told they had to give up smoking. Absolutely, totally agree with that. However, a friend of theirs had smoked and left a cigarette butt outside. They were struck off. And yet as councillors, we don't know that this is what's going on behind the scenes. So I think I'd really like to put this on the scrutiny agenda, because I think
they're coming next month, Amanda. I'm not sure there's a question in there, so. But
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to be there, because the person who's actually presenting, it was one of our social workers, well, the manager of a social worker that we were involved with. So I don't know. I might have a conflict of interest there. I might say things that she might not like.
Councillor Parsons-Holt, as Councillor Ray Strick just said, One Adoption West are coming to scrutiny next month. You've raised a valid point, I think, about the conversion rate, and we did touch on this, if you remember, Councillor Ray Strick, at the last meeting, in terms of analysing that conversion rate, and we do it in fostering as well. How many are applying and how many actually then convert to actual approved adopters or foster carers? And I think it's helpful that you've raised it tonight, because I can send it through to One Adoption West. I'm not sure exactly who's coming with the report. I think if it's something that's, personally involves you, it's difficult then not to rise to that at the meeting. It may be better if you didn't attend, but I'll leave you to talk to Councillor Ray Strick about that, about who's attending in the position that you're in. But just to let you know, I will raise it with them, and I'll ask them specifically if they can bring some information around analysis of the conversion rate. What are the issues, why people are dropping out? We touched on it last time, and it's a more than valid question. It'd be helpful to ask them in advance, then they can prepare. You could ask written questions as well if you weren't able to be at the meeting and you really want to put some points. Please, if you decide that's what's right for you, then please give us some written questions as well.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Chair.
Send them to me. No problem. Anything else, members? If not, I'll quickly move on to the work programme. One thing to say, Councillor Hutchinson's not here tonight, but he expressed an interest in Healthy Futures programme, which unfortunately has now been put back to sometime in the future. That was not meant to be a joke, and obviously wasn't, because nobody is laughing. What I'm proposing is that we discuss that outside this meeting, Councillor Hutchinson and perhaps another couple of members. I'll discuss it once we've got Scrutiny back together in the next week or two, and we'll try and put a date together in the diary when we can talk off the record and report back to this board. Does anybody else have any suggestions for the work programme? That's good. So next meeting, 26th of August, the aforementioned, it's going to be, okay, so bye-bye. And the Pathways report, I'd urge all members to take a great interest in the Pathways report. It came to court with a parent and I thought it was interesting, is how I would describe it.
Chair, can I just say in relation to the Pathway report, I got some feedback from corporate parenting, and I've asked, Claire will be attending Scrutiny with prospects who are commissioned to run the Pathway service, and I've asked her to update the report with the data that we do have on Pathway, because we get monthly reported data. And I know the new service manager was at corporate parenting and did not have the data at her fingertips. So you will get an updated report. It'll be the report you saw, Councillor Ray Strick, but it'll be up to date with the data as it stands. And Jill,
it'll have some numbers in it, will it? It'll have some numbers in it. It'll have some numbers in it. Will it?
Yes, it will. Yes, it will have
That'll
numbers.
probably worth reading even more then.
And the other thing, Councillor Ray Strick, to mention just for September, you did have on your agenda tonight the chair of CASH, the Secondary Heads Association, and the Primary Heads Association. Unfortunately, it's fallen right in the middle of the holidays and they weren't able to attend tonight, but they have offered to come in September, particularly to update you, because it'll be a couple of weeks, I think, more than that into the new term, and thought it'd be really good for you to hear from them directly about how the return to school has gone. So if you wanted to include that, Chair, either on the September or later meeting, I'm sure they'd be willing to attend.
Yeah, I think we've sort of left room for them in September, Julie. That was our intention.
That's good.
Yeah, I think you were privy to the emails, were you? I think you were.
Yes,
okay, members. Well, nice early finish tonight. I'm going to get me dinner now. I took the precautions of making sandwiches.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members.
Stay safe, everyone.
You too.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.